discovery which has not yet been published. It relates directly to the black communities across America. After here, I'm going to Bimini. As she said, I'm also going to be speaking at the Ouachita Conference again in Louisiana about this. But before I tell you about that, people will say, well, big deal, so what? Why is history important at all? History is extremely important. Imagine if I could take from each one of you as an individual everything you knew about life up to last week and just erase it. Where would you be? You'd be lost. You'd be incompetent. You wouldn't know how to plan for the future. And you do the same thing with a people. If you erase their history or you don't tell enough about their past, they also become incompetent and they can't fulfill the future. And that's why a lot of people in the black community have felt, well, how come all of the dreams of the civil rights movement aren't yet fulfilled? And one reason is because this history is still suppressed. It still isn't taught. But there's been a recent discovery which is going to blow the lid off of all that. And that's what I'm going to talk about. Now, basically, what science has now found, although this is suppressed for the most part, there have been some great researchers. You have some wonderful books here, like by Evan van Sertima, who's talking about these things. This is not taught in your public schools, although it will be. The history that the children are learning today is not going to be history that's going to be taught in the next 25 years. It's going to be radically different. We now know for a fact that long before Columbus, there were 4 major migrations of blacks to the Americas, different parts of the Americas, for totally different reasons, totally separated from each other by many centuries. But nonetheless, there were these black, you can call them migrations, but they were not in charge. I'll describe, and you can make up your own mind what they were. The most recent of these took place about 400 years before Columbus was even born, and it's all outlined in a marvelous book over there. It's called The Golden Trade of the Moors. And it is now known that the West African Kingdom of Mali had huge fleets of merchant vessels, and that these kings, these black kings of West Africa, began sailing across the Atlantic to Mexico as early as 900 AD. Now, why did they do that? They did that for trade, not for conquest or invasion. They did this for trade. Mali was very wealthy in gold. They had lots of minerals. Some of the black kingdoms, they were called the Yoruba or the Benin. They were great workers in bronze. But the trouble with West Africa, and it's still a trouble today, not enough food, famine. Somehow, the black kings of Mali had preserved this tradition of long before, where there was this kingdom across the sea, a totally different one. It was very hard to reach. You needed to have excellent ships and good sailors, and nobody in Europe was doing it at this time. But if you cross that sea, this other kingdom across the Atlantic was very rich in a certain kind of food, which the people over there called maize. We now call corn. And these West African kings launched at least 2 major fleets, trading ventures, that went across the Atlantic 900 AD to about 1600 AD. And they brought over their bronze work, and they taught the Mexican people, the ancient Mexican people, who were then known as the Mayas. The Mayas had built up a great kingdom of their own, but in 900 AD they were in decline. They were really on the outs. Nobody knows exactly why, but their society was in decline. They were losing all of their technology. Then these black fleets came across from West Africa, from Mali, and they presented a lot of gold work, bronze work, and in return, they came back with shiploads of corn, maize. Now, we know for sure that this actually happened because very recently, you'll see in the next issue of our magazine, not this issue, the next issue is coming out in about 2 weeks. This is part of the discoveries are happening so fast and furious, it's hard to keep track. They now have found that a certain type of maize or corn, which is growing in West Africa, has been growing there for many centuries, is not native to West Africa. It is a type of corn which comes from Mexico. Could have only been brought over by these Mali seafarers over 1,000 years ago. So this is a first concrete proof that they beat Columbus by centuries, and were not just on a voyage of exploration. They were going back and forth bringing corn back. Now, why don't we know about that? Well, this trade stopped abruptly 1600 AD. 1600 AD, the Spanish, the Portuguese run a real aggressive colonizing campaign, and they took over Africa, and they destroyed a lot of these kingdoms. And with the destruction of these kingdoms went all the knowledge and all the history of these past trades. This is a tremendous lesson for us because, you know, we're so proud of our American civilization. We think it'll go on forever. But when a civilization falls, history tells us it takes almost all memory of it with it. Civilization is really very fragile. And that's why these lessons from the past are very, very important. If we want to preserve our civilization, we have to learn what happened to these others that crashed. So we know for sure between 900 and 1600 AD, long before Columbus was even born, as I say, these blacks were trading, these black kingdoms were trading with Mexico. If I have to refer to my notes, it's because this is new to me as well. There's also traditions in Mexico, ancient Mexico, of these black kings coming. And one of them was called, by the Mayas, if I pronounce this right, Ecchuua, which means the black calabash or the black gourd. It referred not only to his black skin color, but also this gourd that he brought over. This gourd has been portrayed in these Maya hieroglyphs. This guy is portrayed as a West African type of man with robes and everything. And he's holding a gourd in these glyphs. That gourd has actually been identified as a West African type of gourd. So here we're having wonderful proof that there were these contacts between Africa and Mexico. And they actually referred to him by this name. And it shows that the Mayas and these Mali civilizers, these Mali traders, got along really well. It wasn't a conquest. It wasn't one society taking over another. They both had things to offer each other. The Africans had to offer metallurgy and gold, and the Mayas had to offer corn. So there's a wonderful example of, for ourselves too, two totally radically different cultures, separated by a vast ocean, tremendous cultural and racial differences, and yet they still cooperated and got along real well. So it can happen. But these Mali kings, 900 AD, they set out because they had a legend that there had been blacks going long before them. It was only a legend. It was only a myth. And it was on that myth that they chanced and they went across the sea and it worked out for them. But that myth traced all the way back to an even earlier black contact between Africa and America. And I'm talking about now not Mexico, but what we call now the United States. And this relates to this new fabulous discovery that is coming out. About 200 years before Christ, up until right at about the time of Christ, in other words, about 2,000 years ago, there now appears that there were wealthy West African and North African blacks who left Africa on a pilgrimage and came, if you can believe this or not, but there's solid proof for it now, to southern Illinois. Now I'll explain how that happened. In 1982, our time, there was a guy who was going along southern Illinois. He was a cave hunter. And he was, I don't know if you're familiar with southern Illinois at all, on the Ohio River, it's just honeycombed with caves, thousands of caves. They have not all been explored by any means. And he was involved in sport for hunting in caves. It's done all the time. It's rough work. Sometimes these caves are very narrow. He went into, to make a long story short, he went into this cave that no one had ever seen before. And he squeezed through a very narrow entrance, and all of a sudden it turned out into an enormous room. And in this room, he found great sarcophagi, or coffins, coffin lids, made out of stone. The walls are engraved with all kinds of stories, picture stories of men and women in old costumes from the ancient world. And then on the floor, he found stacks of thousands upon thousands of these black rocks that were beautifully engraved with the profiles of people, not Indians, people from other parts of the world. Some of them were white, some of them were Asian, but hundreds are of black people, all in profile. They are made on a type of rock that is found really mostly only in southern Illinois in caves. This rock is like a clay. You pull it out of the ground and you have like a stylus or a pen, and you can draw on it real fast. You can draw profiles and letters, and then as it dries it turns into a hard rock. And these rocks are piled up on the floor of this cave. Now this man's name is Russell Burroughs. He's not an archaeologist, he's just a spelunker, he's a cave enthusiast. He brought these out over time. They're very difficult to bring out because the cave entrance is so narrow. And he's brought out now almost 10,000 of these magnificent tablets. They're very crude looking as rocks are concerned, but the drawings are beautiful. And they show the profiles of black people, some with scarification, which is West African, mostly with not that, some with specifically West African robes, which are still used today. Some will have a man on one side and a woman on the other. Some will be entirely women. It has each one of these 10,000 have a script associated with these pictures. Nobody's been able to translate the script. Well, since 1982, this place has really been contested a lot, but finally some professional archaeologists are involved, some top archaeologists, and they have verified that it is all authentic, and they have dated it now, and there's going to be a lot of information released in the next few weeks and months about this find. Who are these people portrayed in this cave? Not all black, but a lot of them are black. Some of them will show like a black man with a kind of a sailor's cap, and in the background will show like a ship or a fish. It seems as though they're portraying a captain or a sailor of some kind. It's now understood, it's very involved, complex. You'll see the whole story in our magazine in the next few issues. It appears as though around the time of Christ, just before the coming of Christ, in Rome, there were a great many mystery cults. And these mystery cults, they were called mystery because they were secret, not because it was a mystery. It was secret. And in order to get into this mystery cult, you had to go through different levels of initiation, like the Freemasons, you know, which are not unrelated to it, believe it or not. There were many mystery cults like this, the cult of Osiris, the cult of Isis, and a lot of other cults we don't know about. And then to get into these cults, we do know you had to pay money, you had to be fairly well off, and the final stage of all these mystery cults, you had to go on a long pilgrimage, a long quest. All that cost money, but you would go on this long quest to a sacred place. And at that final sacred place, you go through an initiation of some kind. And when you went through that initiation, you were finally a member of this mystery cult. And these mystery cults were all the same in that they promised the individual who went through this initiation eternal life. You didn't die. You survived after life. And these levels of initiation showed you how your soul made this progression. All that's been lost, although some of it has survived in Christianity, which is basically the same. That you don't die. If you are a good Christian, you go eternal life with Christ. And some of these ideas apparently were shared in common. Now these blacks apparently, they all look well fed. There are no starving people portrayed in this. And they all are with jewels and everything. So they're well-to-do people. That fits. What the archaeologists now think is that these wealthy people, no matter what their race was, but a lot of them were black, would participate in this mystery cult, would cross the sea and come to a cave. This specific cave in southern Illinois was the holy place. It was far away, it was hard to get to, it was extremely secret, it was part of the mystery cult, but they knew about it.
The problem is we started thinking like the colonists to know what true our leaders started dropping it. The problem is we started thinking like the colonists to know what true our leaders started dropping it. The problem is we started thinking like the colonists to know what true our leaders started dropping it. The problem is we started thinking like the colonists to know what true our leaders started dropping it.
And they went through their final initiation, whatever it was in this cave, and when they were finished, they had their portraits drawn. It's just like you have your picture taken when you graduated, right? And then in the Catholic Church today, we still have things called votive candles and votive statues. Like you'll go to a church and you light a candle and you leave part of yourself there, or you have like a statue of the Blessed Virgin or St. Joseph and you'll leave it there. Little inexpensive statue. The same idea seems to be working here. You would go through this mystery cult, you'd come all the way across the ocean on this great hard quest, all the way to southern Illinois to this strange cave. You'd go through these rituals, and when you completed them, they would draw your portrait real fast and put your name on there, and then they would store it in the sacred cave. You didn't take it with you. That's why it's done on kind of crude stone, although the drawings are not crude. The drawings are excellent. And these inscribed tablets were put in this cave because it was like the votive part of you. You left that part of you there. So when you went back to Rome or Africa or wherever it was, part of you was still in this cave. And it is no hoax. It was one time I thought maybe it was a hoax, but now they found over 10,000 of these. They're beautifully done. It's beyond anybody to hoax this stuff. So here's this earlier migration. And because it was part of a mystery cult, it was not well publicized. And so we can kind of excuse historians for saying, well, there were no Romans or blacks or anybody at that time going across the ocean, but there were. The reason they didn't know about it because it was part of this mystery cult. Something of that myth, though, must have survived all the way into Mali times, up into 900 AD, when those kings of Mali decided to cross the ocean. Those two black migrations to the Americas are not the only two. There are two more, two earlier ones still. We go way back in history. Around 1,000 years before Christ, 3,000 years ago. It's such a long time ago, it's hard to even imagine. There were a people called the Phoenicians. These were Canaanite people that are mentioned in the Bible. They were half Semitic and half something else. Who knows what they were? They were very well traveled. They were very great seafarers. And they employed all kinds of races on their ships because they didn't really have any particular homeland. They were always traveling, went everywhere. They were the first to go around Africa, known to go around Africa, 900 BC. And it's known that they employed many blacks on their ships, not as slaves. They had no slaves on board their ships. But they did have sailors. They did have captains. These people definitely crossed the ocean also to Mexico. It made a very strong impact on a civilization called the Olmecs. The Olmecs, that's just as a name for this very, very early civilization. The earliest known civilization in Mexico. And everyone thought at one time, well, it's just an Indian civilization until 1861. In 1861, a farmer was plowing his field, came across a very strange domed rock, a black rock. And he couldn't dig it out. The more he dug down, the bigger this rock got. Until he dug the entire thing away. It took him weeks to dig it away. And it turned out that he unearthed a 9-foot-high statue of a head, beautifully done, of an African, not an Indian at all the portrayed features of a West African man. From that time until recently now, there have been 11 of these giant stone heads. Let's see it. I'll give you an idea how big they are. They're an average, well, there's 11 found now. They're between 6 and 9 feet high, and they weigh 40 tons apiece. They're magnificently carved. While these were being found, more of the Olmec civilization was found, and a temple was discovered that had also the same type of people, these West African people portrayed as kings and warriors. So, when the first archaeologist found these, he says, well, these are probably just blacks that got blown across the sea and were enslaved. But you don't make huge heads portrayed with crowns of your slaves. You know, these were obviously regents, powerful people. How did they get there that long ago? Because those heads are dated to about 3,000 years ago. So far as is known, there was no black civilization then. That came later. It appears that these were sailors and captains working with the Phoenicians. Maybe they jumped ships, maybe they got shipwrecked, but somehow they got along fine with this Olmec community, so much so that they rose to become the leaders of that society. One of the other new things that have been found is that the heads, the black heads of these great Olmec kings, wear a strange kind of headgear. It comes down halfway by the ears and circles the entire crown of the head. There's nothing like that anyplace else until they found, starting to find now, these old leather crowns that were studded with gold and brass that were used by the early kings of Mali. So only 2 places in the world do the same strange type of crown, amongst the Olmecs in Mexico and West Africa. So here again there's this parallel. Now, even older than this, I mean, they talk about, you know, our ancestors coming over on the Mayflower. This beats them by thousands of years. there has been another stupendous discovery. I mean, they're coming so thick and fast, probably because our technology is expanding, as you know. And as our technology expands, we're able to find out more faster. Over in Japan, and this relates to what we're talking about, was found an underwater city, the first ever found. It's right off the coast of southern Japan, by Okinawa, where the great battle was fought in World War II. And this underwater city extends for 311 miles on the bottom of the ocean floor. The deepest one is 100 feet, deepest building is 100 feet. The others are 20 and 40 feet. And they show streets and boulevards. They show pyramids. I've got photographs I'll show you tonight. These photographs have not well been publicized, but they will be. Great plazas, huge steps, all underwater. Now, this place is probably related to another old legend, and that is of the lost civilization of Mu. Mu was supposed to be a Pacific Island civilization that sank long ago, but before it sank, and while it was sinking, it was not a fast or catastrophic end for the most part. The oceans rose when the ice melted at the glaciers that covered all of this area, you know, at one time. 10,000 years ago, they began to melt very rapidly, and when they melted, they flowed into the oceans of the world, and they raised the ocean level by about 100 feet. So this civilization goes back maybe 10,000 years. Hard to believe, but the evidence seems to suggest that the city at the bottom of the sea goes back that far. The reason I mention that is because all of the traditions of Mu and all of the research that has been done into it in our show there were three races of people on Mu. There was a Caucasian people. I'm going to use these terms, by the way, scientifically, not sociologically. This is just to define a people. A Caucasoid people, a Negroid people, and a Mongoloid people. Excuse me, not a Mongoloid people. A brown people. I don't even know how we put them in. And that was considered only legend, only myth, that these three races were on there. They equally shared power politically. The reason why they did it was part of their solar religion. They believed that the sun has different phases of the year, and so they should share power. As the sun shares power with its light on the earth, so these three races had to share power equally. The reason why they believed that was they believed God manifested his power and his identity in natural law. What you see, the flowers growing, the sun, the stars. You can't see God, but you can see what God does. That's God's law. So if you live in harmony with God's laws, you see it in nature, you're doing God's will. That's what these people believed. And so by having the sun at different phases of the year, you share different power. Sometimes the white people, the Caucasoids would be the power. Sometimes the blacks would. Sometimes the brown would. That's their tradition. When this land sank, this high civilization brought some of its ideas to different parts of the world. The brown people became part of what is now Polynesia. And the Polynesian, I can tell you for a fact, the Polynesian legends are thick with stories about Mu. The Hawaiians have a people they call the Mu, who were there before they were. The white people apparently didn't do as well physically. They were more or less wiped out, or they dispersed and intermarried with people in China, it appears. But the blacks, however, went in two directions. And this is beyond legend now. Now we're moving into hard science. When Mu sank, or when Mu was in the process of being inundated by this great rising wave of water, they went in two directions. They went out to what is now known as Oceania and became a people known as the Negritos. And they also went towards Mexico and impacted this Olmec civilization. And the reason why we now know that is because there was a genetic trace done. You know about DNA now. That's getting a lot of play in the paper. DNA means you can trace the genetic code of a people. The genetic code of the, and there are still native blacks in Mexico. That's never been explained by archaeologists before Columbus arrived. DNA tests done on them. DNA tests done on the bones of some of the Olmec people, not all of them, the ancient remains, show a definite genetic trace, not to Africa only, but across the Pacific. When they found that out, they said, that's got to be wrong. It just doesn't, there are no black people out in the Pacific, but there's this definite trace, lineage they could trace out towards Hawaii and beyond Hawaii. Then they began a worldwide match of DNA. Well, who does these strange black people, who do they match up with? They don't match up with Africans. They matched up with the Negritos in Oceania. It looks now, scientists believe, there was a central point from which they went in both directions. So this is a marvelous heritage. And, you know, some people say, well, you're a white guy, how can you talk about stuff like this? I get flack from this on both sides. The purpose of our magazine is to tell the truth about what happened to our country and our continents before Columbus. And if it shows that there were white Vikings here, and there were, we tell that. And if it shows that there were Asians here visiting, Chinese here visiting Mexico, we'll tell about that. And if there were blacks here, we have to tell that too. That's all part of our heritage. And I think it's thrilling and exciting for all of us. It's remarkable. So what we're telling you, I mean, this is just in a nutshell, and you're going to be seeing a lot more of this, not just in our magazine, believe me. You're going to be seeing this on TV. It's bound to burst out because it's really known in the archaeological community. You've had 4 of these major impacts that the black people have made to the Americas, not only before Columbus was born, but before even Spain or Italy existed. That's the kind of roots that are in this country. And by knowing that, and the more you know about it, it's an empowerment. You're really rooted. You have got a heritage which is more than slavery. Sure, there was slavery, but that's not all. That's a small part of it. Long before that, there's a heritage of kings, seafarers, religious missionaries, and they were all here. But it happened so long ago, there's just so little of it left. And that's basically my story. What connects it up is even the word Moor, because it's pronounced differently in different parts of even of Africa. And they call themselves Moor, Mu, Mur. There's all variations of that, so that even the name Muir. I'll leave you with one thing which is really interesting, too, that relates to this. The Mali kingdom, part of their religion, around 900 AD, they believed in a god called Vodun. Vodun or Vodan. And they said Vodan was this great sailor who came across the sea, and he taught the Yoruba and the Benin tribes how to work with metals. And he was their man god, as it were. He was like their founding father, their George Washington, was Vodun. And he brought tablets. He said they brought tablets, which he taught people how to read. Vodan was his name. Vodan and Vodun. Across the ocean, all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, amongst what they call the Quiché Maya, or the lowland Maya that I talked about, they have a tradition of a god they called Vodan, same name, who brought tablets across the sea to tell them how to work metals and so on. So here we're dealing with the same tradition. This is something which is not made up or interpretive. It's the actual fact. It's the truth. So the more of these you have, like I say, the greater the sense of empowerment. So I'm going to stop here because I think these photographs are better than anything I can say. And if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt the action here. Yeah, I'm going to have to turn the slide off, I guess.